Hello, and welcome. It finally happened, everybody. We're covering a Fox game on this channel. Alongside me are my three nephews. Aren't they cute? Don't get too attached to them, they'll cease to exist once this video is over. There were a lot of great video games that came out last year, and Endling Extinction is Forever was one of my most anticipated titles. And sadly, I haven't heard too many people talk about this game. Though Endling did share a launch date with a certain other indie animal exploration title that everyone and their grandma had their eyes on. I first caught wind of Endling during the Nintendo Indie World Showcase at the end of 2021, and what can I say? A gorgeous cel-shaded art style, survivor simulator mechanics, stellar environmental design, an emotionally driven score, a critique on the constant ticking time bomb that is late-stage capitalism and the cataclysmic destruction it has on the environment, and the nightmare hellscape we're all heading towards if the powers that be don't change and continue to set this whole rock ablaze for their own profitable gain, filling me with existential dread? Did I mention about the adorable foxes yet? This game was an absolute must-play for me the moment I saw it, and after playing it, well, let's just say I've been wanting to make a video on Endling for almost a whole year now. For now, this video will be spoiler-free, but I will go in depth and analyze everything later on. But what is Endling truly about? Did it live up to my expectations? Well, let's take a look and discuss at what exactly is Endling Extinction is Forever. Endling Extinction is Forever was developed by Hero Beat Studios, an indie studio in Barcelona, Spain. Hero Beat Studios was co-founded in 2017 by Javier Ramello, the company's CEO and director who came up with the original idea for Endling, and Pablo Hernandez, Endling's concept artist and art director. The two would take a financial risk by quitting their jobs, taking out loans, and relying on their life savings to pursue this passion project. To make matters more stressful, video game development is hardly considered an industry in Spain. However, Endling's first prototype received a good reception from Game BCN, a video game incubation program in Barcelona to help fund, teach, and start up indie game studios. Due to their success with Game BCN, Endling received an Epic Mega Grant from Epic Games and was then picked up and published by Handy Games, a subsidiary to THQ Nordic which is based in Cologne, Germany. With additional funding, the two would then form a whole team to work on the game. Endling was built on the Unreal 4 engine. The concept started off as a point-and-click fox simulator before developing into the themes of Endling. Originally, it was a linear 2D side-scroller, which was so they could have control over the camera and focus on the environmental storytelling with the degradation of the vixen's homeland. But this was retooled into a 3D environment with paths, as constantly moving right would make the player forget their burdens and worries of what they had just witnessed as they progressed further. The switch to 3D also allowed the player to explore their surroundings and observe the persistent decay of their home as each night passes. Ramello designed Endling with three core pillars in mind. The first is authenticity, keeping the game grounded in reality, such as not allowing the mother fox to do things that a fox normally wouldn't do, like pulling levers to solve puzzles, or make extensively long video essays on video games that they like. Keeping the player's perspective to that of an animal witnessing events outside her own comprehension, making the player speculate the story happening around her. The second is to build a bond with the cubs, as a parent protecting her young, seeking shelter to keep them safe, to play with them, and comfort them when they are scared or upset, teaching the cubs valuable life skills to further ensure their survival, not only for themselves, but for the family as a group. And finally, the third pillar is the environmental message, wanting the player to feel how the environment is being destroyed and polluted by humans to this very day, how things could go in 50 to 100 years if carbon emissions are left unchanged, how common and adaptive animals such as foxes could go extinct, and getting the player to reflect on what they can do to help the planet. Endling was first announced on July 10, 2018 with a short trailer, and released over 4 years later on July 19, 2022 for Steam, GOG, the Epic Games Store, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One, accompanied by a beautifully animated 2D trailer. Seriously, I love this. This is so good. It captures the nuance of Endling as a whole. It's just so adorable and sad. Endling would also see a mobile port on February 7, 2023 for iOS, Google Play, and the Galaxy Store. Endling would receive positive reception from fans and critics alike. The Verge praised the game for not holding back on the punches with the game's eco-conscious message and survival mechanics. Other publications, such as Noobfeed, Indie Game Fans, and Noisy Pixel, each gave the game 9s out of 10. Admittedly, I haven't heard of these publications prior to this video. On the opposite end, Why Now Gaming had a less favorable view. Quote, "This fox's view of humanity has powerful moments, but tugs too hard on the heartstrings, critiquing the gameplay mechanics and story cohesion, giving it a 63%. Endling has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam and a 75 Metascore with a user score of 8.6 on Metacritic, though there are some slight alterations between the console ports." Endling would go on to be nominated multiple times and win a handful of awards. It was a nominee for Games of Impact at the 2022 Game Awards, nominee for Social Impact at the Game Developer Choice Awards 2022, a winner for the Games Beyond Entertainment category from the 2023 BAFTA Awards, winner for Outstanding Game Special Class for Nation Academy of Video Game Trade Reviewers 22nd Annual Awards, while also becoming nominated for Outstanding Original Dramatic Score, New IP, Outstanding Art Direction, Contemporary, and Outstanding Game of the Year. And these are just some of the more recognizable ones. Endling has a ton of other accolades and achievements to note here, some of which are in Spanish, so I know I'll botch the pronunciations for, so I'll spare myself the embarrassment. Hell, even as I was working on this part of the script, Endling would go on to win the Most Significant Impact and Game of the Year from the Games for Change Awards on July 19, 2023, which, coincidentally, was earned on the game's 1-year anniversary. Endling is a 2.5D survivor simulator adventure that has you play in the role of a mother fox on a quest to finding her lost abducted cub, while protecting her other 3 babies from humans, predators, and starvation, while enduring the destruction of the world around her. As the title implies, you and your cubs are the last remaining foxes left on the whole planet and on the brink of extinction. Sorry guys, I didn't survive the apocalypse. I couldn't get a dumb can of beans open and I died. Also, beans are gross! The player is free to explore their environment every night. As the player progresses throughout the story, every few nights the game will provide new locations for the player to explore. Since you can only move left and right, there will be ledges where the player can deviate onto a different path. These directions can get a tad disorienting, to be honest. You will be spending a lot of time consulting your map just to confirm if you're heading in the right direction. Speaking of the map, you're given a few icons, such as blocked off paths, character locations, and event spaces that the player can check on if they so please. Some of these events will only occur on specific nights and are completely optional. The player isn't required to check these locations out, but they will miss out on some world building and unique character engagements if they do. After the second night, one of your cubs is stolen by the Scavenger, the main antagonist of the game, and your primary objective in Endling is to find and rescue your missing pup. This is done by picking up on their scent from objects left behind by the Scavenger. Every few nights, the player will be given 3 objects that they'll need to search for. These aren't too difficult as you're given a trail to follow, but these provide visual and audible clues as to the Scavenger's whereabouts and where he has taken your cub. However, as you expected, finding your cub won't be an easy task. As the world crumbles around her, the vixen will have to be on the lookout for predators, humans, and traps that will harm her and her cubs, as well as other hazards and roadblocks such as a pesky badger who's territorial of her space. If the mother fox gets injured, whether by humans or traps, she will be left vulnerable for about a minute or so, and will die if she engages again before she can heal. There are also a few enemies who, if you get in their line of sight, can kill you in one shot if you aren't careful. The player will also have to be aware of the clock, as they and their kits will be more prone to human interaction once the sun has risen, but the player can still explore around during the daytime, so you don't immediately have to gun it to your den once the sun has risen. I'd even say it's necessary to explore around during the day if you plan to check everything out in Endling. If the player chooses to go to bed early, this will come at a cost of the cub's hunger meter. Which, another task the mother fox must manage is keeping her cubs fed. Since we foxes are omnivores here, we can eat just about anything. Rabbits, fish, mice, birds, berries, eggs. Trash! The mother fox herself also doesn't need to eat, and the 3 cubs have a shared hunger meter. Fail to maintain their hunger, one of them will start to show signs of starvation, being capable of following the pack at a steady pace, and will need to be fed immediately. If you're not constantly on the lookout for nearby food sources, you are certainly going to run into some problems real fast. Should you fail to find food, or if they perish another way, the weight of your cub's death will constantly haunt you throughout the rest of your playthrough, as their icon will forever be replaced with a skull. Their corpse will remain at the same spot where they died, and the mother fox will get visually depressed every time she passes by her dead cub. Your cubs can also obtain unique skills as well. Some are shared between the 3. such as jumping and eventually high jumping, are obtained as they grow older and progress within the game. However, each cub also gains 2 unique skills exclusive to them as well, such as squeezing through planks of wood, digging, or climbing up trees. These skills can be found at certain locations on the map, but with no indicator as to where, rewarding the player for exploration with new optional skills. And these skills will come in handy as food becomes a lot more scarce in the later half of the game. Having some of your cubs die will actively make it harder to find food. Some events will also not trigger or play out differently if you have lost some of your cubs. The player will need to keep the mother fox and her cubs alive while searching for their missing cub within the span of 30 days. As each day progresses, the environment continues to deteriorate and become much more difficult to navigate, with some paths being blocked off or a new enemy patrolling there each day, especially with the introduction of the furrier. This punk bastard is ruthless in chasing you down and can be a real threat if you're not careful. If he does catch you, get ready to button mash like your life depends on it. Endling Extinction is Forever isn't a super difficult game, and should roughly take the player about 3 to 4.5 hours to play from start to finish, though this does depend on how much time you're willing to invest into the game's world and narrative. Endling is a very polished game. However, I do want to note some of the bugs that I experienced over my 4 playthroughs. The first glitch was during my initial run where I couldn't put anything down. This caused the death of my second pup. You could even witness my heartbreak in real time on my stream VOD. It wouldn't let me put the rat down! It wouldn't let me put the rat down! It wouldn't let me put the rat down, dude! What the hell? All I could do is just watch the starvation take them from me. I accept full responsibility for the loss of my first cub, though. I was a stupid dummy and I couldn't find food. No! 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 It was truly a tragic moment for me. And since my second cub died in front of my den, every morning she'll get up only to die over and over, which is kind of funny if not devastating. And on my third playthrough, on one night, my cubs just refused to eat anything, though both of these issues seem to be resolved at the start of the next night. And this one is sort of funny, but on night 10, you gain access to the second den, and you're supposed to sleep here, which then sets the game into spring. However, if you choose to go back and sleep in your first den, the game will just never progress into spring, allowing the player to go beyond the 30-day cap. However, this doesn't break the game, as once you sleep in the other den, it just progresses like normal, despite the excessive day count. From a gameplay perspective, there are some real notable flaws that I do want to critique and talk about. However, I will touch on those later on within the spoiler section of this video, as what I am going to say will affect your immersion on a gameplay level if you haven't experienced Endling for yourself. None of these critiques make the game bad by any means, but they do dampen the gameplay aspects of this title once you know how it all mechanically works. And I do think it's best to go into Endling blind before I just rip the curtain down in front of you. I'm going to very briefly talk about the introduction before I start getting to spoiler territory and my analysis on everything. Endling Extinction is Forever wastes no time getting into the action, as it has you escaping a field engulfed in flames and running for your life. This immediately sets the tone that the world the fox was living in is about to change forever. Here, the game gives the player a tutorial on some of the basic controls, such as button mashing to dig, holding down the A button to climb trees and poles, as well as taking junctions to different paths. At the end of this sequence, your first enemy encounter is a deer. Though calling him an enemy is kind of misleading, the poor guy is on fire. You're bound to fail this check, as the fox and deer fall off a cliff, and the deer sadly dies from its burns seconds later. We're then introduced to the unforgiving environment the player will be spending the game in, the scavenger, Endling's main antagonist, and the fox's new den. Here she gives birth, and the player has the option to select different color palettes for her 4 cubs. This is a minor detail, but it makes each person's playthrough just feel a little bit different and more unique. As I've previously mentioned, after the second night, one of your cubs curiously sniffs out a frog-like lure and is then abducted and kidnapped by the scavenger, tasking the player to track down the scavenger's whereabouts and reuniting with your lost kit. There is no dialogue or text boxes in Endling, leaving the visuals, body language, facial expressions, atmosphere, music, and sound design to tell the story and get the player feeling, speculating, and thinking as they go, leaving things to their own interpretations. Endling is exactly what I wanted Stray to be. Don't get me wrong, I really liked Stray, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed once B12 was introduced 30 minutes into the game. Endling, in my opinion, perfects the show-don't-tell approach with its storytelling. As each night passes in-game, the player will witness more and more destruction of nature, and observing how the humans interact with these changes and amongst themselves. You're not a main character who's going to save the world, talk to NPCs, and stop the bad guys. You're just an animal trying to survive. While the player will most certainly be focusing on the vixen's journey of rescuing her lost cub, there's a grander story happening around the fox and outside the player's objective if they so choose to observe and engage with it. That's all I could really say before I start spoiling things. There's a lot of subtle and wonderful things I love about Endling that I want to go over, talk about, and speculate. If you couldn't already tell, I highly recommend you go play this game for yourself. It's not super long, and I definitely think it's worth your time. If you do choose to close this video off and go play the game yourself, my advice would be to pay close attention to the character's environment around you. There's a lot of neat details that's easy to miss. Even on my third and fourth playthrough, I was still finding new things to talk about here. I will be providing my own thoughts, experiences, critiques, and interpretations to the story of Endling, and there's also going to be some discussion on climate change and real-world events, which is, fun! So here's a timestamp to jump to my presentation chapter. The mother fox searches for her cub. Every few nights, the player will pick up on their scent and track down items left behind by the scavenger, providing the player with visual clues as to where he has taken the pup. The scavenger is an intimidating man who carries around a large bag, effectively doubling his stature. His gas mask's eyes glow a villainous yellow, giving him an otherworldly and monstrous appearance. He also wields a giant sniper rifle, making him a constant looming threat to the fox. The scavenger keeps the fox cub locked up in a cage and is always seen carrying them around in some capacity. However, the vixen isn't the only victim in the scavenger's wake, as we witness him doing things such as stealing medicine from a fisherman and breaking into the Care Corp facility. This man is a completely unhinged and bastard menace to those around him. He also navigates the area with a makeshift cart out of an old bathtub and garbage. Though, as a scavenger in a polluted and desolate climate, it makes sense that he would use whatever he can at his disposal. While he remains stationary at some locations, he will impede the player's progress as he will try to snipe you if you're caught in his sights. Halfway through the game, the scavenger also tries to use the cub's scent to lure the mother fox in a vicious attempt to kill her. It's here where we're introduced to Molly, the scavenger's daughter. Unlike her father, she has a much kinder approach, and she even offers the player food. Contrasting her gas mask from her father's, she doesn't have the menacing yellow eyes. And I'm at least glad that, even in a doomed future, we're still putting adorable cat ears on literally anything. In her first flashback appearance, we could see her feeding the caged cub, but the scavenger is a cold man who scolds her for it. We also get the motive as to why he has taken the cub, to make a profit off of their fur, a motive we should have all seen coming for sure. We can find Molly a few other times, such as beside her house, cheerfully happy to see the mother fox, who can even allow Molly to pet her, and within the third act inside the refugee camp, where she happily hugs the fox again. Alarmingly, however, she isn't wearing her gas mask and is struggling to stand on her feet. We're gonna put a pin in the main story for a moment and talk about the world itself and the environmental calamity happening around the fox. We're never given the full context or details as to what's happening, as our perspective is limited to only what the fox observes. But you don't need me or the game to lecture you about climate change. While Endling depicts of the absolute worst case scenario where the world has fallen into a lawless post-apocalyptic wasteland, we all know the ecological damages mankind has done to the earth and continues to do to this very day. In the prelude, due to rising temperatures, there is less moisture in the soil and trees, making them more prone to catching on fire. While human activity makes up 2/3 of all forest fires, I do want to note that the fire could potentially have started due to a lightning strike, as it is raining. Which is what I would have said had I not found out that if you run past this pipe, you can actually see 2 Care Corp employees setting trees on fire. I'm gonna geek out so much about this later on, but throughout the whole production of this video, I kept finding new world building things to talk about, and I just noticed this hidden secret after I was like 90% done with this whole video. The landscape in the first act of the game is fairly natural and covered in the white winter snow. There's a few dead trees here and there, a few vehicles, and in the distance you can see an industrial building pumping smoke into the atmosphere. Nothing too severe at first. As each night passes, we witness more pollution and garbage scattered across the landscape, and on a few nights, the player can witness a garbage truck dumping tons of waste off a cliff, plaguing the river below. With the abundance of filth added to the scenery, by the time spring rolls around, the player will no longer be able to find any fish to eat. The place just isn't habitable for them anymore. The second act has the fox make her way to a forest. It starts off lush and beautiful. Contrasted from the desolate whites and grays of winter, we have a mystical palette of cool greens, blues, and purples of spring. As lovely as this forest is, however, no flowers can be found here. If the player is observant of their surroundings, they'll come across a collection of bee homes that are left abandoned and cast aside, knowing that the bees are forever gone. And we all know that once the bees disappear, we will be next. Hashtag save the bees. Just like before, we see a rapid increase of human activity and deforestation. Each night, we see more and more trees vanish or cut down. By the time the lumber industry is finished harvesting, this once lively green forest, home to many animals, has now become a murky brown barren wasteland. Like the fish, this also removes rabbits from the game. An optional place the player can visit is the farm. It has a pretty red barn design on the outside, but the second you enter the facility, you're faced with the grim reality of the meat and agricultural industry as thousands of chickens are slaughtered on an assembly line. In the back, you can see cage after cage of chickens, all clustered next to one another, and on the other side of the factory, yellow male chicks that are deemed unprofitable are grinded into a mushy pile of dark brown flesh. It's all uncomfortably upsetting and an unfortunate byproduct of the consumerist system we all find ourselves in. You know the saying, let's say it together. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. God, I can only imagine how rancid this slaughterhouse must smell like. There's not even a bucket catching the decapitated heads. The Care Corp industry plays another major role in Endling's narrative. They are the representation of the large, faceless corporations and monopolies who are responsible for the unstable state of the world we're currently in. Despite the ironic name, you know that this company isn't looking out for the people's best interests or the environment and are only interested in their own financial gain. All the hell that's about to unfold, cleverly foreshadowed by this single billboard. You might be asking yourself, come on, Fox, this is just a big corporate is soulless and greedy and evil and bad. And yeah, big corporate is soulless and greedy and evil and bad. Don't worry, I'll provide some real life examples later. The Care Corp facility will be constantly looming over the player, like a foreboding castle in the distance. Not only is Care Corp part of the textile and fabric industry, the second largest water polluter behind agriculture, but they also own the construction, lumber, and dumpster industry, and presumably much more. On the outside of the farm, it appears to be a different company, but as soon as you do go inside, you can find Care Corp branding everywhere, making this farm a subsidiary. You will see this logo everywhere during your playthrough. The conditions of these facilities are abysmal and disgusting. All of the employees are miserable. These aren't your corporate higher-up offices masquerading as this safe and clean establishment. These are the dingy factories you stick the beaten-down working class in. Almost all of the humans in Endling are homeless, tired, and hungry. They will attack the vixen if they get a hold of her. They're not doing this out of malice, but as a means of survival, to find their next meal. A lot of the humans are also wearing gas or face masks. The atmosphere that Care Corp has created is toxic and uninhabitable for the people to live in. The roamer, besides Molly, is one of the few non-threatening humans the Mother Fox will come across during her journey. She can be found on certain nights singing, providing the smallest bit of life, comfort, hope, and kindness into this destroyed world. In the third act of Endling, a refugee camp is set up for the homeless wanderers, created by the community. Hi, post-editing Fox here. I want to throw this tidbit in real quick because I got this wrong. While I was putting this video together, there was a post on Endling's Twitter referring to this place as the dumping ground. where climate refugees are awaiting access to the actual refugee camp, which can be seen in the far distance over here. This camp might have actually been set up by CareCorp. That said, anytime I bring up the refugee camp in this video, I'm referring to the dumping ground here. Also, the starving humans are technically climate refugees, people who had to leave their homes and countries due to climate change. However, I mostly interpreted them as just homeless people who can't afford the egregious cost of living. Though with the lack of in-game dialogue, I do think my interpretation is still a fair assessment to make, even if it's not the one the devs intended. This place is a complete dump. The refugees are burning trash to stay warm. People are sleeping in pipes. There's no food, water, or medical supplies besides what the refugees had on their backs. There's a giant tire fire right by the CareCorp factory and the refugee camp, pumping cancerous smoke into the atmosphere. CareCorp has done absolutely nothing to help or aid these people, and doing so would be considered unprofitable in their eyes. The working lower class are exhausted, frustrated, and done with the capitalist system that exploits them and casts them aside while the rich get richer. There's a lot of graffiti alongside the buildings depicting the frustrations of the common people. You could argue that the graffiti is a little unrealistic, which, I mean, sure, no one has bothered to spray paint a penis on the wall, but I do think it's just a tad bit on the nose and kinda goes against the whole show don't tell approach I've been praising this game for. Though I do like the your grandson is already dead one, since, the baby boomer generations are the ones mostly responsible for the climate crisis we find ourselves in today and won't bear the repercussions of their actions. You can find protest signs scattered across the refugee camp, how we have and should have the right to clean oxygen and water, how corporations, CEOs, and lawmakers are actively choosing to stick their heads in the sand and ignore ecological dilemmas that they themselves are creating. Sadly, the echelons of big corporations do not give a crap about people like me or you. CareCorp's security will continue to grow throughout the playthrough, starting with a few employees patrolling the area, to using guard dogs who will kill you instantly if you're caught. If you inspect the trees, there's security cameras hung up everywhere. They have the whole place on constant surveillance. There's an optional interaction where you can witness a refugee running off with a dead chicken, which causes a guard and guard dog to chase after and kill him, all for stealing one chicken to keep himself fed. It's pretty clear that CareCorp doesn't value the lives of the lower class and chooses profits over people. The statement is quite literally, work for us or die. No doubt that these workers are probably making the bare minimum, keeping the people oppressed and within their control. The refugee camp, while miserable, does provide a sense of community among its members here. On one night, you can even see the roamer performing a song in front of the other settlers. The scavenger and Molly are here as well. On night 26, you can hear the roamer singing her song once more, giving the refugee camp a peaceful CareCorp has completely taken the place over and has detained the refugees. It's unclear what actions the roamer did to deserve to be murdered in CareCorp's eyes. For my guess, it was nothing but peaceful protesting. But regardless of the reason, poor innocent Molly had a front row seat to her execution. I'm going to switch gears and talk about two other characters in Endling's story. The first is the Badger. When the player first encounters her, she will act defensively and block off her route for the player. This isn't a super big deal, since you can just go around her, but you're bound to run into her by accident if you aren't paying attention, and you will drop your food if you're carrying something. Several nights later, you can find her stuck inside a trap. You do not have to help her if you so choose. After all, she has been nothing more than an obstacle to you so far. If you choose to ignore her, she'll permanently be removed from the rest of the playthrough and die off screen. But if you do wish to help her, she will still act hostile if you approach her. However, she will drop some food for your cubs as a thank you. And you did the right thing for helping her out. In the second act, you'll find Badger again, but she's lying on the ground physically drained, inferring she must have fell from this high ledge and injured herself. While she is incapacitated, her cub is still stuck on top, terrified as the scavenger is waiting to take a shot. You are not obligated to help, but as someone who is also trying to keep her children alive in this unforgiving environment, you can risk your own life to save the Badger's cub. Doing so will leave a very positive impact on her. After rescuing her baby, the Badger will allow the fox to fast travel between any of her dens, which will be super handy to the player. On the following night, she will assist the fox by taking down the fence. allowing the player another way to access the farm and the furrier's house. And after night 20, the player is granted access to the third den, starting the third act within the refugee camp. On some nights, the badger will once again provide food for your cubs, but not only that, she even shares the den with you. This is so unbelievably heartwarming and adorable. Because of your kind deeds, the badger feels indebted to you. You're both just two mothers trying to get by and protecting your kids. I love this so much. Not a single word is spoken here, but you understand the emotions and bonds that these two animals share. The badger's whole character arc is just freaking fantastic. This is pure speculation on my part, but I always assumed when you encountered Badger at the beginning, the two animals were just being territorial with one another. However, there is some trash caught around the badger's neck, and if you look closely, it kinda looks like the fox is trying to get it off of her, but the badger retaliates and acts defensively as a survival instinct. The other character I want to briefly go over is the furrier. This psychotic son of a bitch is Endling's secondary antagonist alongside the scavenger. His introduction in the second act is kind of a jump scare, as it just happens so suddenly as he slits a rabbit's throat in front of you and proceeds to chase you. He, unlike the other humans, is ruthless and will continue to pursue you unless you either run far enough or enter a location he can't get to himself. The player could set distraction spots to lure the furrier each day to avoid confrontation. Failure to do so, however, will have him spawn randomly at times throughout the day. He also requires the player to truly butt mash if caught to stay alive. My headcanon is that he's just your average everyday Florida man on a ketamine bender, giving him superior strength. He's also wearing a yellow respirator mask, has a prosthetic left arm, and runs around wielding an axe. The furrier's house is an optional location to explore. Like a lot of locations in Endling, the place is filthy, and since his occupation is literally to skin animals, there's pelts everywhere on his property. He also has a bunch of mangy mutts in cages, which I originally thought they were used to help him hunt wild animals, which perhaps they used to be. However, after looking at some of his pelts, some of them kind of look like his dogs, even with the mange. This is speculation, of course, but considering how scarce wildlife has become, I can see him resorting to skinning his own dogs to try to keep his business going. If the player knocks over a cage and riles the dogs up, he'll successfully get a sneak attack and cleave the vixen with his axe. This will leave a cut that will stay with the mother throughout the rest of the game. Unlike the other humans who gather at the refugee camp or are employees of CareCorp, the furrier has no affiliation with any of the other characters and is only out for himself. He even tries to steal the fox cub from Molly, only to be threatened at gunpoint by the scavenger. On night 27, the mother fox is finally close to tracking down where the cub has been taken to. Each flashback sequence, however, depicts the deterioration of Molly's health as she vomits up water and grows more frail by the second. And on the following night, you get the scent trail of the final location to your cub's whereabouts. The player will find the scavenger's bag as he ditches it to confront a sickly ill Molly, and later he leaves behind his gas mask in an attempt to plead for help. The other figure, however, seems unwilling to assist. When you finally do find the scavenger, it all becomes clear to the player. Despite his efforts, Molly, his daughter, has died. You realize what was on the line for him from the get-go. He wasn't kidnapping your fox cub as a selfish means for his own gain or profit. He took your cub in a desperate effort to make money to save his daughter. This was an act of survival. However, the world is now a barren and unforgiving place, and everyone has to look out for themselves. Along with the natural resources being removed from the planet, so was empathy. Besides the roamer, Molly, and eventually the badger, no one else shares their level of kindness to anyone outside their family. No one was there to help, and no one cared. Thus, the scavenger's mission sadly ended in failure. With nothing left to lose and nothing to gain, he releases your fox cub back to you, perhaps as a mutual understanding of knowing what it's like to lose a child. Carrying the empathy that once lived on in his daughter, this moment is very bittersweet, and it really got my eyes watering a lot. Seeing the happy reunion between the mother and her child as the solemn music starts to play, but then being immediately reminded as to what was lost in the process. I can't think of many games where I've managed to do a complete 180 on my opinion on an antagonist in such a short amount of time. You really can't help but truly feel sorry for him. The sound of him sobbing over his dead daughter it gets to me. The player has one last option to let the scavenger pet you, as a sign of forgiveness, understanding from one parent to another that you know that their actions were only done to protect their child in a world driven by ruin. And this moment was so impactful to me. Up until this point in my initial run, I hated this man's guts and hoped that he would either die or get his comeuppance. But that hatred I had for this character vanished. He isn't just a one-note villain the game led me to believe. He's human, with his own life, values, family, and goals, cleverly conveyed by the removal of the bag and gas mask. Not only does the fox forgive the scavenger, should the player choose so, but I, the player, also forgive him. While his actions are morally gray, at the very end of the game, Endling reminded me about the lost resource in this world: empathy. Along with the fox, the scavenger also embarked on a story of his own. On a first playthrough, his actions are left fairly vague, but it paints the picture that he is a bad guy, stealing medication, breaking into the care corp facility, trying to lure the mother fox using the cub scent as bait, and being an active threat throughout the game. But as we just realized, the fox cub was the only thing he had that held any monetary value on him. When we're introduced to Molly in the flashback, at first it would appear he is scolding her for playing with the fox cub, but it's so she doesn't get too attached to it. What I didn't realize until my second playthrough is that on night 13, the scavenger can be found mourning in front of a makeshift grave. While the player doesn't get a good view of it at first, we do get to see it close up a few nights later. It's the scavenger's late wife. It's one of the few moments where the scavenger doesn't have his bag and gas mask on, where we see a vulnerable and human side to him. If you find Molly on night 17, you can see her painting a picture of her family on the side of her home. Whether Molly is aware of the information that her mother is dead is never explained. However, due to her innocent and cheery demeanor, it's heavily implied that she was shielded from the harsh truth of her mother's passing. How she died is never established and left to player interpretation, though with Molly's blissful ignorance, I'm certain it was sudden. Shortly after her death, the scavenger and Molly lived a nomadic life traveling from place to place, which perplexed me as to why on my first two playthroughs. As it turns out, CareCorp evicted them from their home and planned to demolish their residence. If you return a few days later, you'll find a tree has completely taken out their house. With nowhere to go, they eventually seek shelter within a refugee camp. Things progressively get worse as Molly starts to show symptoms of a sickness, and the scavenger has run out of medicine to give her, the same medicine he stole from the fisherman, implying Molly has relied on these pills the whole time in order to survive. The furrier tries to take advantage of the situation and make off with the scavenger's only source of leverage while Molly is resting. However, the scavenger threatens him at gunpoint and reclaims the cub. And the scavenger's tub cart starts to fall apart, abandoning their only source of transportation, which undoubtedly would have exacerbated Molly's physical condition. The scavenger tried his best to treat and take care of Molly despite the circumstances, only for his efforts to sadly go in vain, leading to her inevitable demise. It truly is tragic and upsetting. Molly was a wholesome and innocent child who did not deserve a doomed planet because of past generations. She didn't deserve to have to fight for her survival, and she, more than anybody, didn't deserve to die. Molly is the only human child found in Endling and represents our future generations, children who will unfortunately and unfairly bear the brunt of climate change. Her death can be taken as how we failed the future generations, but also the inevitable extinction of humankind. There are actually a few significant parallels between the scavenger and the mother fox. They both experienced losing a child, they were both forcefully removed from their homes, and here's a fun fox fact for you. Foxes are usually monogamous in nature and will mate for life. While this is never brought up in Endling, both the scavenger and the fox also share the plight of losing their partner. Should the player return on the following and final night, they'll find the scavenger dead beside his wife and daughter's grave. Originally, I thought that he had taken his own life, as he had lost everything that was important to him. Back in February, when I wrote this part of the script, I had a joke here saying that whoever wrote the Wikipedia page for Endling must have thought so as well, but because it took me forever to make this video, this has now been amended with the correct information. Shoving an axe into your chest is a rather unorthodox way of unaliving yourself, and on closer inspection, it is made more clear with the specific axe in his chest. It's the same one the furrier wields. At some point, the furrier got him. My hypothesis is a combination of survival of the fittest, and as a furrier, his job is to make animal pelts. No doubt how expensive a fox's pelt would go for in this reality where they're extinct. I would infer with the knowledge that the scavenger let the fox cub go, the furrier would go ahead and mercilessly kill him. As we saw earlier with how CareCorp murdered people, any sense of morality, civility, law, and justice are completely gone. Since the scavenger is now a broken man, I can only imagine that there was little to no resistance from him moments before his death. Once the player has reunited with their lost cub, Night 29, the final night, allows the player to explore as they please one last time, albeit with roadblocks, threats, and traps to still look out for. The only noteworthy thing to do on this night is witnessing the dead scavenger. Once you turn in for the night, a giant flood sweeps across the land. The fox's habitat is once again being destroyed around her as her cubs all safely make their way to the scavenger's abandoned tub cart, drifting away in the fast current, breaking the family apart yet again. The mother desperately swims towards her young, only to be hit with an oncoming barrel, and she tragically perishes in the depths below. Okay, that's not how this story truly ends. There is one final epilogue, and the mother survives the flood, but the current has taken her to a desert wasteland. In the distance, you can see people slowly marching in the scrawling heat. To the left, the player will find all their cubs trapped in oil, which the mother will need to pull out one by one. All the foxes are exhausted and depressed. The only thing they can do is traverse the desert and continue to march forward. You will also find that the owl has perished in the flood, but as you approach this wall, you can hear the unsettling wailings of an animal in distress. On the other side lies a heartbreaking sight. It's Badger, crying out over her dead child. The painful and mournful sound she makes, the way she pokes at the lifeless body, knowing all that you and Badger have been through during your playthrough, seeing her and her baby in the den every night in the third act. This was so emotionally devastating, and it made me a sobbing mess. Even rewatching this footage really gets me worked up. And there's nothing you can do to help the badger. You and your cubs can only sit there and watch until you move forward. As the player progresses, the furrier can be found trying to get gas out of an empty gas can. Once he spots the fox, he immediately runs and pulls out the scavenger's stolen sniper rifle, but the gun jams before he can take the shot. We also later see Badger once more, who runs ahead of the fox. This desert epilogue is a representation of the true end of times of what could happen. The foxes are submerged in oil, a toxic, non-renewable fossil fuel we continue to depend on and kill each other over to this very day. The furrier trying to get a single drop of gas as if his life depended on it. Us knowing that gas and the advantages of power it once represented are gone from this reality. As you continue forward, you'll see wind turbines, solar panels, and eventually a nuclear power plant, or possibly a geothermal plant. Alternative energy sources that mankind could have benefited from are all left in decay and ruin. It's too late to go back now. There really is no turning back from this, which, from my interpretation, is why all the humans in the background are only heading in one direction, forward. All they can do is adapt to climate change and move forward. As the sun sets, the furrier makes a final appearance, trying once more to bag the fox and her cubs. The fox desperately tries to escape and digs underneath the fence. Badger can be seen on the other side helping her, which was delightfully heartwarming. The cubs make it across safely. However, the same cannot be said for the mother. Taking a bullet, she manages to slip past the furrier, but knows that her time is reaching its end. The environmental color palette shifts from a sunset orange and purple to a deep and somber blue, as she agonizingly tries to move, but collapses under the pain. With all of her energy sapped out, she gives one last look at one of her cubs, and passes on. Devastated, her children huddle around her lifeless body as the credits roll. Once the credits are over, the cubs and the badger make their final goodbye to the mother fox, and were given a heartfelt thank you from the devs. And that concludes Endling Extinction is Forever. To say the last 15 minutes of this game had me crying would be an understatement. I was an absolute mess. I figured I was in for a downer ending, but my god, I wasn't prepared for any of this. As depressing as this experience was, it was super impactful and went beyond my expectations. I absolutely loved this game's story. I was emotionally invested in the characters and the struggles between the fox, badger, Molly, and later on the scavenger, putting myself in their position as they each endured their own form of hell and did what they could to keep them and their children alive. The game does a phenomenal job at making the player empathize with these characters, and despite Endling's short runtime, it successfully earns the emotional gravitas when it takes away any semblance of a happy ending from them in the end. Look, I'm not a parent, and I don't know if I'll ever want to be one personally. I just don't have the maternal instincts, financial stability, nor would I want to potentially subject them all to, well, all of this. But I can firmly say that children are indeed the future, and they don't deserve a dead planet upon arrival. We, the older generations, need to preserve the planet and take whatever measures we can to limit our carbon footprint. At a quick glance, Endling is a story about a mother fox finding her lost cub. But deep down, it's the uncomfortable conversation about climate change, and for us to reflect on what could happen if we continue the trajectory that we're heading now. Endling is, in my opinion, an interactive art piece. You're not supposed to feel good or fulfilled reaching the credits like most video games. The core message is getting the player to love and care about the planet. The unsettling outcome of Endling isn't what will happen, but what could happen, inspiring action, awareness, and hope among its players. How we treat the planet, the wildlife that inhabit it, and fairness to the poor and working class have always been super important to me personally. In preparation for this video, I spent a vast amount of time reading through studies, articles, and watching documentaries and essays on climate change, which admittedly was a very unsettling rabbit hole to go down through. There are people who are way more smarter and qualified than I am to speak on these matters. However, Endling's core message is about raising awareness to climate change, and I wanted to extend on this conversation by providing some basic information about what is happening right now, how we got here, how corporations successfully pin the blame on us, our CO2 outputs, and what we as individuals can do. I am going to include a timestamp to skip my PSA if you wish to, as it is 10 minutes long and a shift in tone from my usual content, and we deviate from talking about Endling throughout the whole thing, so there you go. But with that said, strap in, folks. Right now, we're in a race against time to phase out fossil fuels, limit carbon emissions, and keep the planet from exceeding the projected global 3 degrees Celsius increase by the end of the century. Due to the nightmarish acceleration we've been on over the past few decades, we'll be lucky if we can make it below 1.5. And we'll need to cut our current emissions in half by 2030 and a net zero by 2050 if we're going to even make that. Fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, have been the backbone energy source throughout the whole world since the Industrial Revolution. And since then, the global temperature has already gone up by 1 degree. Developing nations and third world countries are sadly the ones who are going to get the shortest end of the stick, despite contributing the least amount of CO2 into the atmosphere. As you already know, alterations in climate can cause disastrous effects. Melting of glaciers, removal of permafrost, drought, forest fires, rising sea levels, and flooding to name a few. It all depends on the region, let alone making places uninhabitable for humans and extinction to wildlife. Some places now require artificial man-made solutions in order to keep up with these changes, a lot of which can be expensive to small owners. I'd give this climate change averting catastrophe documentary a watch, as it goes over some changes that have already occurred in various regions due to global warming. I'll have a link for it, as well as all the other sources I'm about to cite in the description. Human activity is the main driving force behind climate change. However, the fault doesn't lie on us individuals, but the large unregulated corporations and monopolies that are too big to fail. Corporate greed and the capitalist economic system that the ultra-wealthy benefit from allows them to continue to harvest and exploit the environment for their own financial gain. The goal for any corporation is to see economic growth by any means necessary. This meaning of success and expansion is sought after and is viewed as a positive trait to any businessman, investor, and government. Most of the elites on top of the system acquired their fortunes through looting, monopolying, exploitation, rent grabbing, or inheritance. The ultra-wealthy not only exploit natural resources and the poor working class, but they unfortunately obtain so much political and cultural power to lobby against and block off any effective climate and systematic changes from happening. The personal carbon footprint from the ultra-rich are also significantly higher than the average person. In 2021, They on average emitted more than 50 tons of CO2 that year. Meanwhile, the average American emits about 15, and the rest of the globe emits 4.7 on average. In 2021, the richest 10% were responsible for almost half of all energy-based emissions. That 50 tons, by the way, was only their personal CO2 outputs, such as yachts, private jets, or additional homes that they own. This isn't including the businesses that they run or work for. Last year, the globe emitted 36.8 billion tons of CO2 on just energy. Let's look at BP Oil's CO2 outputs. The oil giant alone emitted roughly 340 million metric tons of CO2 in 2021, making that tiny 50 I just mentioned practically nothing. Speaking of BP, in 2004, in an attempt to greenwash their public image, the oil giant invented the term personal carbon footprint, shifting the narrative of climate change from large billion-dollar producers, the ones chopping down forests, pumping out dinosaur juice, sending toxic sewage into our streams, and slaughtering billions of animals, onto the consumers. This tactic was successfully used to pin the blame of climate change onto consumers as much as possible. And sadly, we as individuals are powerless and dependent on the industrial carbon-based systems that they have created, ensuring that nothing changes. This tactic even goes deeper. You know that famous environmental ad where the Native American cries as trash is being flung at him? This ad was created by the group Keep America Beautiful in 1971. Despite the eco-friendly message, this same group also lobbied against recyclable bottles in 1953, as it would cost bottle manufacturers more money than making disposable ones. You know who funds this organization? Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, American Can Company, and Owen Illinois Glass, to name a few. Keep America Beautiful coined and vilified the term litterbug, and successfully shifted the general consensus focus of the garbage problem from the billion-dollar producers onto us consumers. While, yes, littering is bad and that behavior is completely unacceptable, littering is only such a tiny part of a much larger garbage problem. Single-use food packaging makes up about 89% of all exported plastics. It requires extraction of petroleum, it creates air pollution to transport, and water pollution to process. Whether it's a single littered bottle of Gatorade or a giant landfill, these plastics mix with organic materials and will contaminate nearby groundwater or create CO2 as it's burned into the atmosphere. We as consumers can choose what products we buy, and we should be conscientious about where our money goes. But the manufacturers have the money and resources to create alternative packaging, slow down production to a sustainable level, and our governments can and should put laws to hold these corporations accountable. To quote the great late Billy Mays, "But wait, there's more." Actually, the iconic quote is, "But I'm not done yet." The Mandela effect strikes yet again. ExxonMobil, the fifth largest carbon dioxide producer in the world, have been well aware of what damages they've caused since 1977. Despite their own scientists accurately predicting just how bad things could go, ExxonMobil decided to make their stance and advertise climate skepticism and denialism, spending millions to fund think tanks to spread misinformation, to undermine the public consensus on global warming throughout the 90s and the 2000s. In 2001, Randy Randall, Exxon's then chief lobbyist, had close ties and lobbied to the Bush administration to remove the US's IPCC climate scientists who were around during the Clinton years. Randall and Exxon had successfully removed and replaced the climate science staff to halt progress from happening. In 2005, Philip Cooney, an oil lobbyist and chief of staff of the White House's Council of Environmental Quality, doctored and edited the work of government researchers. When he resigned from his governmental position, he was immediately hired by Exxon. Exxon's goal was to get Bush to pull out of the Kyoto Protocol and delay the US's inputs on climate regulations and muddy the waters by emphasizing the uncertainties of climate science. And Exxon got what they wanted. They jeopardized everyone's future just to maintain short-term profitability. Americans indirectly emit, on average, 15 tons of CO2 a year, but this is primarily due to the fossil fuel-based transportation and electrical systems we live under. In the United States, we emitted roughly 5.5 billion metric tons of CO2 in 2021. Roughly 13% of the country's total emissions stem from commercial and residential usage, refrigeration, heating, cooking, and waste removal, which was about 700 million metric tons between 332 million individuals. Though with the addition of indirect electricity, which we consume about 30% of, our emissions are effectively tripled to 2,000 million metric tons, and that's not even factoring transportation. We have been making progress since the mid-aughts. In 2022, roughly 40% of the US's power grid was on nuclear and renewable energy. However, we're unfortunately not on track of reaching the Paris Agreement's emission target by 2030. Yes, we can lower our own personal footprints a bit by changing our habits, and, if applicable, we should all definitely consider what little things we can do to help the planet, such as eating less meat, shopping locally, and living modestly. But to most people, things like eating a plant-based diet, carpooling, or commuting by bike are either considered luxuries or are financially impossible or impractical to most consumers. I'd say to not feel guilty about your own personal emissions. It's not your fault that climate change exists. We are all little guys under a large and complex system out of our control directly. So, what do? Well, I do think that it's important to, 1, not to take the doomer approach to climate change. Look, I suffer from climate anxiety too, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that everything's going to turn out okay in the end. There will definitely be ramifications that will take hundreds, if not thousands of years to restore. But refusing to do anything about it and accept that the world will be over soon won't help anybody. And 2, stay informed, stay active, and vote for those who are actively seeking realistic targets of bettering our environment or speaking to your local communities and senators. I don't have all the answers on how the world will go about solving the climate crisis. I'm just a silly gaming YouTuber at the end of the day here. What I do know is that we must act now, phase out fossil fuels, adapt to these new changes, and for our governments and those responsible to finance and aid poorer developing countries who have been affected by climate change the most. Climate change is a multi-layered and complex problem. I barely scratched the surface on this topic, and I encourage you to look more into it yourself. There are a multitude of environmental, economic, and humanitarian issues related to climate change that I unfortunately don't have the time to cover in this video. In my first draft, I had a whole tangent about the many atrocities of companies like Nestle and Amazon, like how Nestle exploited and profited off poor third-world mothers with an unnecessary baby formula that didn't work, leading to malnutrition, health issues, and death among millions of infants, or how Amazon exploits its employees, such as forcing the workforce to work overtime during the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. How these large soulless corporations not only have done ecological damage, but also put profits over people's lives. But this section of the video is already super long as is. I do, however, want to end this PSA by recommending a handful of videos from people who are infinitely way more knowledgeable than I am on these matters. Simon Clark produces some really well-informed, documented, and easy-to-digest information about the climate. 3 strategies to beat climate change, why nuclear power will and won't stop climate change, and is 2022 a year in climate change to name a few. Our Changing Climate also produces high-quality and easy-to-digest videos on a wide range of topics. How Exxon pollutes the world, why Amazon shipping is so cheap, why capitalism is killing us. Again, like Clark, there's just a lot of options to pick from here. Ordinary Things makes great comedic essays and deep dives on scummy and unethical business practices. The Evil Business of Nestle, Apocalypse Now. Again, there's a lot to pick from here. Climate Denial, a measured response by H. Bomber Guy, is a certified classic. He is one of my favorite YouTubers, actually. Company Man has also covered Nestle with his Why They're Hated series. Frontline PBS has an expose on the Amazon warehouse workplace. And finally, how you can fight climate anxiety via climate action by Ankur Sa. Definitely consider giving them all a watch if you're interested. They will be linked in the description. DL, DW, eat the rich. Okay, now that we got all that depressing stuff out of the way, I can now finally go back to talking about Endling. I want to gush about some of the other things I noticed on my subsequent playthroughs of this game. What I love about Endling is that there was a lot of care and attention to details put into the backgrounds and stories within the environmental design. When I made my second go around in Endling, my intent was just to have a fresher experience for this review, mostly from a gameplay level. What I did not expect was to find so many details and story beats within the world that I had completely missed. Then again, maybe my perception is just god-awful. There's the eagle. I'm kind of embarrassed, actually. I took an extra closer look at all the things that were happening this time around, and I found so many secrets to talk about. And then my hard drive died and I lost all my captured footage, but then I played the game for a third time and found even more stuff to talk about. For example, the fisherman's house. The player only ever has to come here once. Here you'll find a fisherman with a face mask on and a gas mask man patrolling the area. Through the player's perspective, they would want to avoid the threat and get out of the area as soon as possible. But out of my own curiosity, I came back the next night, witnessing the fisherman on his boat, enjoying his time doing what he loves. He's technically not supposed to be doing that, but that's besides the point. A few nights later, the fisherman is now sitting in a chair while the threat is inspecting him. I thought, erroneously, mind you, that this man was one of the Care Corp employees. You know, comes in, sees stuff, but doesn't give a crap. But no, this is not a Care Corp employee. This man is consoling and hugging the fisherman. Whether he's his dad, uncle, grandpa, brother, friend, or partner, the relationship dynamic doesn't matter here. This fisherman was a loved one, and he's going to die, and there's nothing the gas mask man can do about it. These are people like you or me, living their lives and trying to get by. If the player returns after winter is over, they'll find a grave with the fisherman's hat, fishing pole, and radio beside it. The radio will continue to play music out loud in his memory. It also occurred to me later on that the reason why the fisherman was dying was because the scavenger stole his medicine. Sure, it was a desperate attempt to save his daughter, but because of his actions, the scavenger indirectly killed the fisherman. And I'm sure most players didn't even witness this side story, and that's what I love about the atmosphere to Endling. Here's another. Let's rewind all the way back to the very beginning of the game for a second. As you're running away from the fire and falling trees, the player will see a few animals running alongside them, notably a rabbit and a deer. As the fox is escaping, the player will briefly, and I mean very briefly, run past these two billboards. If we pause in this frame, we can read out what they say. One tells you the name, Fighton Natural Park, the nature preserve where the game takes place and is a far cry of its former self. But notice the billboard beside it, Preserved Species. Here you have rabbit, squirrel, wolf or coyote, deer, bear, fox, badger, and whatever this first thing is. Hedgehog? But notice the red dashes across each animal. Foxes at this point are believed to be extinct, with you being the very last one. Badger isn't crossed out as we engage with one throughout the game, and the player will find a few rabbits still remaining. But despite everything, there's still deer. Or at least, there was still deer. The player's introduction of the whole game is not just observing a poor defenseless deer burning to death, but witnessing the extinction of another common animal species. This deer could have easily been you, and it really adds a lot more gravity to this introduction. And the player probably didn't even realize this due to being bombarded with escaping the fire, confrontation with the deer, introduction to the world around them, and the fox's plight of giving birth. It also wasn't until my third playthrough did I finally figure out why the scavenger broke into Care Corp. It was to steal some blankets, which he then later used to mark the cub's scent to lure out the mother. I also almost completely missed out on the bee homes, which I touched on earlier. Hashtag save the bees. One last thing I picked up while I was mostly finished with the script is that every time the player finds a new lead to the cub's whereabouts, one item, notably the plot important ones, such as the frog lore, medical box, or busted up Care Corp device, will spawn inside the fox's den. These changes are fairly subtle, but can easily be overlooked. There's such great little world building details hidden around the environment of this game that, if the player observes and thinks critically, will really reward the player if they're invested into the narrative. I'm sure there's still some stuff I've completely missed out on as well. Catching little details like this really makes the game worth a second or third playthrough just to see all the neat little things happening around you. Like, I completely didn't even realize these two 2319 lads during my first two runs. They don't have as much of a story arc going on as far as I'm aware, but whenever you do find them, they're always inspecting stuff together, and once you know of their existence, you'll want to keep an eye out for them. I actually couldn't find them on the final day, and I spent way too long wondering how their story concludes. My fourth playthrough, out of my own curiosity, is what I would like to call the doomed playthrough. Oh gosh, we're not done about the depressing stuff. In this run, I actively avoided searching for my cub, and I didn't help out the badger. As you expect, the badger was removed from the game after day 7, so she, nor her cub, survived to the end. Not too much was noticeably different. However, the scavenger couldn't be found on night 27, meaning a reunion with my lost cub would be impossible. The scavenger's corpse can still be found on the final night, however, with the cage open. During the epilogue, instead of trying to find gas, in this timeline, the furrier won. He got to your cub before you as he holds the lifeless body of your child like a trophy. I know that the furrier is just trying to do what he must to survive, but this guy is still a bastard. So onto my critiques and criticisms. I'm going to start with the gameplay immersion stuff I admitted earlier. So here's a clip of my initial playthrough. As you can see, I am slowly pacing myself, making sure that I don't stray too far away from my cubs, out of fear that something will happen to them. And here's a clip from my following playthrough. If the player continues to run, you are going to leave your cubs in the dust by a mile. Turns out that these adorable little babies were pulled straight out of Mario Kart 64, cause the AI will slingshot them right back behind you like it's nothing, despite feeling like you're much farther away from them. The only exception is if the camera is at an angle where they're in the frame, such as the farm or at the CareCorp factory. Otherwise, you can completely disregard how far away they are from you. I do also wish that the mother fox and each cub had their own hunger meter to maintain. This isn't too big of a deal, but it would have added more complexity to the survival mechanics, leaving you to decide who to feed. Funny enough, if one of your cubs is starving and a different cub eats the food, the hungry one will no longer be on the brink of death. Also, for the sake of realism, I do wish that the less cubs you had, the more food sources it would provide, since it's less mouths to feed. The game would have the player believe that being outside during the daytime would put them in immense danger. However, at least from my 4 go-arounds of this game, not much notably changes besides a few humans walking around the area, which are more or less just roadblocks than actual threats. The player isn't really penalized for staying up late. I said this already, but it's absolutely necessary if you plan to check out everything this game has to offer. However, and sadly, my biggest gameplay criticism is that there's only 2 actual ways for your cubs to die: starvation and the owl if you awaken it and don't button mash at it. This realization really takes a lot of tension and pressure off the player. I spent my initial playthrough being so careful, as I thought humans could also hurt and take my babies, but no. The mother fox is really the only one in danger here. On my other playthroughs, I just breezed around through all my enemies without paying much thought to my kids. It's like the horror game equivalent of thinking a monster is nearby due to amazing sound design, but once you realize there never was a monster and it was just a fabricated illusion your mind made up, it really loses the magic. If anything, I do wish that the scavenger and the furrier could have been able to abduct or kill your cubs, as horrible as that sounds, making them more of a terrifying threat. On a gameplay level, Endling falls sorta short on the survival aspects and leaves a lot more to be desired. That said, I don't think the gameplay here is bad or that these flaws ruin the experience as a whole for me. I do love what is here, but I do think it could have been refined more. That said, had I not played Endling a second time and worked on this deep dive of a video, I probably wouldn't even have picked up on these hiccups. This next one is gonna sound kinda dumb, but bear with me for a second. One item I really wanted to note was Molly's pink bear, as she drops and loses it when her father snatches the fox cub away from her. Once the player finds the bear, it'll be one of the items that shows up in the forest den, and finally, the pink bear can be found one last time, resting on top of Molly's grave, representing the wholesome little girl she once was. Having this bear here is almost perfect. But a real critique here, unless I missed it, is that this pink bear doesn't make any appearance prior to the player finding it on the ground. I think simply having it sit on this box during her introduction, or if she was holding it beside her, or if it was within the wall drawing prior to her dropping it, it would have made the bear much more significant as a symbol of childhood innocence in a destroyed world. If this bear just had 1 or 2 instances of noticeable screen time, it would have made sitting here on top of her grave a lot more tragic. A child losing their favorite toy and sense of comfort is incredibly heartbreaking. And this could have even been a side quest of finding it and bringing it back to her, which could have altered if it was resting on her grave or not. Of course, at the same time, Molly disregards the stuffed animal to care for the real living fox cub instead, so I can see the bear losing its significance to Molly, but I imagine losing a stuffed animal, one of the few things you have left, would still really hurt. Hell, 20 years later, and I'm still not over losing my carnival bootleg chonky Pikachu plush that I got when I was 5. I used to bring him with me everywhere! I know that this is just me being a pretentious art critic here, but I'm not exaggerating when I say that I combed through my footage as I was so certain I would find this bear again, but couldn't find any trace of it. And in a game when there's a lot of attention to minor details and story beats like this, I do think it was a missed opportunity. Okay, so update to this real quick. During Endling's 1-year anniversary Twitter posts, X posts. God, that's so freaking stupid. We got a handful of behind the scenes stuff. And not only is there an adorable gif where we see Molly playing with the bear plush and the fox cub, but we also got concept art of the scavenger, specifically his tub cart, otherwise dubbed as the mule, where you can see the bear strapped to it, and this reflects in-game as well. But this does blend in with the rest of the objects, so you'll have to forgive me for not noticing this at first. These next few are kind of nitpicks, but I still want to mention them here anyway. During the night where everyone is gathered around the fire and listening to the roamer, the scavenger doesn't have his bag and gas mask on, which I'll compliment right now, as it's one of the few instances where we get to see him be human and spend time with his daughter and the community of refugees. But, where's the fox cub? Molly isn't holding the cage and it's not in his tub cart, so I would infer that it's strapped to his bag, but I would find it hard to believe that he would let that get out of his sight for even a moment, considering how significant the cub would be to helping his daughter. My other two criticisms relate back to the beginning of the game. The player can see the CareCorp van aggressively whiz by them. I'm a tad disappointed that this is the only time we ever encounter a moving vehicle up close. I would have loved for cars to be an obstacle the player needed to avoid while also getting their cubs across safely. Kinda like that truck scene from The Animals of Farthingwood. You know, the kids show where the hedgehog couple gets smeared into the concrete by an 18-wheeler. This was a real thing that happened. The other thing that kinda bothered me was the drone that scans the scavenger, because A, we only get to see the drone a second time when the scavenger pumps it full of lead a few nights into the game, and B, I don't know, the design looks kinda too sci-fi considering everything else in this game looks fairly modern. Like, if it looked like a regular drone and not something pulled out of Aperture Science, I wouldn't have this issue. Again, all these complaints are only mere blemishes compared to the magnificent storytelling Endling offers the player. Endling has a sincereness to its narrative and motive, and while it isn't perfect, I mean no game is, I wouldn't want it any other way. Endling's visuals are absolutely gorgeous and provide a great sense of character and identity. Endling uses a stylized, cel-shaded art style that I found super captivating, and it makes the whole experience feel more earnest and personal. I don't think this game would have been able to convey its impactful message and narrative had this been rendered in a realistic art direction. The environment design is absolutely top-notch and is one of the game's strongest assets. Like, you can stop at any time and have a stunning composition that tells a story. The atmosphere has this cool color palette of rich blue night skies, varying shades of green foliage, quiet and cool whites and grays of the winter's snow, warm and welcoming violets during the twilight hours, along with dreary desaturated grays and browns of garbage pollution and the refugee camps, paired with dangerous reds across the man-made infrastructures. These colors are all strikingly beautiful, and it makes the orange fox really pop out from her environment. I did notice some pop in at times, but this hardly ever broke my immersion of the game. I really adore the character designs a lot here. Of course, this is an easy win for me, cause, adorable foxes. Like, oh my gosh, look how freaking cute this is. But I love how threatening and intimidating the scavenger and furrier are from their designs alone. The menacing glowing yellow eyes of the scavenger's gas mask makes him look alien from the fox's perspective, and the furrier looks like an intimidating force you do not want to go up against. And by that, I mean your everyday meth head Florida man, but with a mechanical arm and an axe, which further adds a level of unhingedness to his design. The animations are also stellar and feel naturally organic. How the fox walks, trots, runs, lowers her body when sneaking around, limping with an injured leg, how she leaps up and dives head first as she secures her prey, how precious it is when the mother fox plays with her cubs, how the cubs just when they jump off a ledge. You can tell that the animators put a lot of attention to fox and canine behavior to get these movements just right. I didn't even know you could break a fox's neck by bending the head backwards like that, and I do not envy the animator who had to look up the reference for this. The characters within Endling easily convey emotion through body language alone. You can tell when they're hungry, tired, cheerful, and miserable just by their posture. You can easily comprehend what a character must be like from their body language alone. There aren't too many opportunities where you get up close to see faces. It's rather used sparingly, but the selective times that you do, they're used to further convey emotional weight. You understand what's going on through the character's mind. Since there is no dialogue, the visuals and expressions have to do the heavy lifting to convey emotion, and Endling nails this perfectly. Even the environment has a lot of animation going on, such as dumping trash, running a slaughterhouse, the smokestacks from CareCorp, or the quiet, gentle snowfall. Despite its decay, it really does make this world feel alive. There aren't too many cutscenes within the game. They are mostly used to convey a passage of time, as we see the fox cubs age instantly. Also, these are just freaking adorable, like, oh my gosh, look at this. The only cutscene that feels a tad jarring is the winter to spring one, as it is the only one that's in 2D and doesn't feature the foxes. I do like this one though. We see a dead human buried within the snow as plants grow outside their body and continuing the circle of life anew. Music is used quite sparingly in Endling, only playing themes during major and minor plot sequences, whenever the fox is in danger, as short jingles, or to add a level of emotional energy at certain locations. The soundtrack to Endling is quite heartfelt, graceful, and elegant with its usage of string instrumentation with a few instances of guitar, piano, accordion, percussion, along with ukulele and vocals whenever you encounter the roamer. The score has a few endearing and whimsical moments. However, the majority of the tracks have this quiet, somber, and heartbreaking tone. These songs carry so much powerful emotion, even outside the context of the game. I was listening to the soundtrack on its own while I was typing this part of the script, and I honestly started tearing up. I don't know, there's something about a melancholy orchestra that fills me with this sense of unshakable sadness, and I just find it so beautiful. The only other video game soundtrack that has ever captivated me the same way was Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura, which was also completely done with an orchestra. Case in point, Endling's soundtrack probably shouldn't be on your road mix unless if you and the boys want to be sad the whole drive. I also love how each threat has their own unique themes that really play not only to their character, but how you encounter them. For example, the Scavenger has these deep and powerful timpani drums as a reprised version of his guitar melody is being played. Since his stature is already large and intimidating, the score further emphasizes the severity of sneaking by and the lethal consequences should the player get caught. The Furrier has this electric distorted guitar whenever the player encounters him. The guitar melody has this unpredictability and punk flair which really captures the Furrier's personality, and the percussions that kick in when being chased just screams, "Run!" The owl, like the Scavenger, provides a sense of danger when encountered by the player. It emanates the quietness needed to sneak by, but uses a recorder, a more organic in nature sound, whenever it's on the attack. Each of the main characters all have their own themes, which will alter depending on the encounter throughout the journey. The sound design is also fantastic and is in the forefront throughout the whole game. All the sounds are natural, whether the fox is stepping in snow, moving a bush, or stepping on a bear trap. Sounds found within the environment, such as falling trash, large heavy contraptions within the factory, the quiet ambient sounds of the winter wind, it all blends in exceptionally well. Whenever you see a flashback, you also hear whatever sounds happened as well, immersing the player into that exact moment when they occurred. The fox cub sounds are also way too freaking cute and precious, and the sound of them in distress fills me with distress. The UI sounds are also snappy and have this hollow sound that I find very pleasing. Due to the lack of dialogue within Endling, the game's visuals, animation, music, and sound design really had to push the narrative and emotions, and I can confidently say that the development team did a phenomenal job at the presentation as a whole. So, should you play Endling Extinction is Forever? I would definitely recommend it, though there are some caveats for sure. From a narrative perspective, Endling went beyond my expectations for what I had hoped, and I can easily say that Endling was my favorite video game from last year. We live in an age where video games can be more than just entertainment and a form of escapism. Endling is an interactive piece of art with a very important message to share, a message that can be universally understood by everyone. Our planet's future is in danger, and if mankind, our governments, and large corporations don't change their destructive ways, and if we ourselves don't do our part to help nature, we can very well see a doomed reality similar to the one depicted in this game. Despite my love for Endling, I know that this game won't be everybody's cup of tea. I would recommend against Endling if you're looking for a more casual experience or an action-oriented game. This is what I would call the opposite of a comfort or cozy game. I'd also advise against it if you just really don't want to be reminded of our global climate crisis, or just feel incredibly depressed with the game's serious and bleak subject matter. The game does also retail for $30, which, for a 4-hour indie experience, might be a hard sell for some players. But despite the short runtime, I believe Endling is truly an experience worth having. From a gameplay perspective, Endling isn't the most robust game out there and leaves more to be desired for its survival aspects. However, Endling's main emphasis is its message, story, characters, environment, and presentation. And there was a lot of love, care, and attention put behind this game. I had a lot of fun observing, speculating, and writing a video on this gem of a title. Though, doing climate change research definitely filled me with copious amounts of existential dread, Endling is one of those masterpiece titles that managed to make me cry, and it will leave the player feeling a wide range of emotions, and feel more eco-conscious about taking care of the planet. If there's one takeaway I hope to leave you with, well, besides checking out Endling of course, is that I hope it'll inspire you to do at least one good deed for the Earth. Whether it's planting flowers, picking up litter, putting a bee house in your yard, eating less meat, shopping at locally owned businesses, writing to your senators about how they'll lessen your community's carbon footprint, or simply donate to a charity that goes towards the planet. The Earth can use any help it can get in these dire times. Endling Extinction is Forever is available on Steam, the Epic Games Store, GOG, Nintendo Switch, PS4, Xbox One, Google Play, iOS, and the Galaxy Store, and I would highly recommend checking it out. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate your viewership and your support. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave me a like and subscribe if you're new. Any little bit to help me fight the YouTube algorithms is highly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching this. I hope if you haven't played Endling before, I hope I didn't spoil the whole game for you. To my returning subscribers, which between this video and the Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs, we hit 2,000, so I want to first say thank you so much for subscribing, and I hope I get to continue to entertain you guys with my silly nonsense. But also, I'm sorry that I haven't uploaded anything in like 7 months. I promise I'm not dead. Well, this video is proof of that, but yeah, I'm so sorry that I haven't uploaded anything, between that time. Work and life kind of got in the way of things, and it really took time away for me to like be creative and work on these videos, which sucked. I love doing this, and I actually started working on this script back in November of last year, actually, and I planned to have this done back in December, but then, you know, the holidays and stuff, and then work kind of like overtook my life for like 8 months. I would say doing the climate change research for this video was probably the hardest thing to do. You know, I really wanted to include a PSA about it because, like, I feel like, you know, we all know climate change is happening, but I kind of feel like we all don't really look at the numbers exactly. So I really wanted to include it. I hope it wasn't too long, wordy, or overwhelming to you if you watched it. That was one of my big fears. I actually rewrote the whole PSA like 3 times because I was not satisfied with my first 2 takes. And, you know, there was a lot of information I really had to leave on the cutting room floor because there's just a lot. And I'm just one person, and I didn't want the PSA to eclipse the video itself. So I still think 10 minutes was too long, but, you know, I hope you all learned something. I hope it wasn't, you know, like I said, I hope it wasn't too overwhelming or too preachy or, you know, I think it's important to be informed about this kind of thing. Eat the rich every day. Seize the means of production, my friends. And I had a joke somewhere in the script, or I wanted to put it in the script, where so last year during Black Friday, I actually ordered Endling through GameStop, and along with a couple of other games, which I never actually got my copy of Endling, and I was thinking, I'm like, oh, well, you know, they canceled it. But it turns out they canceled it on December 31st, 1900. Just for, I guess, how they have it automated or whatever by canceling it themselves. It just, they canceled my game order like 123 years ago. That's amazing. Again, I'm so sorry for like the lack of videos and stuff. I want to plug in my Twitch real quick at twitch.tv/afoxontheinternet. So I haven't really been able to make videos, but I have been streaming more lately, and I love streaming. So if you want more of my silly nonsense, you should totally join me over there. I have my Discord server, which I have my little community here, and I post on there more frequently than I do on my Twitter or X, which is so dumb. But yeah, so I have some of my socials there. Second channel, which I don't post too much in there. And then I have my VOD channel, so if you want to see me play through something, there you go. I've also recently become a Humble partner, which is pretty exciting. I've been using Humble Bundle for like 8 years now. It's where I get the majority of my Steam games and the existential dread knowing I'll never be able to play a fraction of them. But yeah, if you want to support some charities and developers out there and your favorite internet fox while getting some cool games out of it, I have an affiliate link in my description below, so check that out. Yeah, so I don't really have anything else to add, but I really want to thank you all so much for watching. I'm so sorry this took forever, and I hope to see you all in the next one. All right, my friend, stay safe and take care.